Hello and welcome to Stuart Saturday Live with me, your hostess, Andrea Zuvich, the 17th century lady. My guest today will be historian Gareth Russell, and he'll be joining us in a few minutes. I recently had a surprise trip to Lincoln, and it was my first time visiting that lovely city, and it was amazing. Lincoln Cathedral is quite breathtaking, and I found it a beautiful place to visit. I almost invariably become moved in these sacred and historic spaces built so long ago by our ancestors, and I do regard them as national treasures. So if you can visit, I really recommend it. Although the cathedral is mostly associated with the medieval period and earlier, it has some additions from subsequent eras, including the Stuart period. During that time, Lincoln Cathedral suffered damage in 1644 during the Civil Wars when parliamentarian troops smashed windows and statues, and even some of the brasses on the floors were removed. Following the restoration of the monarchy in 1660, King Charles II appointed Michael Honeywood as the Dean of Lincoln. 16 years later, in 1676, the Wren Library was completed. Designed by Sir Christopher Wren, it was filled with Honeywood's books, nearly 4,000 of them. It's always nice to learn about a fellow bibliophile. William Byrd, who was an English composer of the late Renaissance, early Baroque period, was born in Lincoln and became the organist and master of the choristers at Lincoln Cathedral in the 1560s. Also in Lincoln Cathedral is a nave pulpit, which had been installed in St. Mary's in Rotterdam as a gift from Queen Anne and her favorite Sarah's husband, John Churchill, the first Duke of Marlborough. But it was moved to Lincoln shortly before World War I, and that was because St. Mary's in Rotterdam was demolished, I believe. So I really loved Lincoln, and I haven't gone to the castle yet, but and I have dear friends who live there, so I do have to make another trip. But now, without further ado, it's time for our history chat. Today's guest is the best-selling and highly acclaimed author of such works as Young and Damned and Fair, as you can see here. The life and tragedy of Catherine Howard at the court of Henry VIII. He's also written The Ship of Dreams, The Sinking of the Titanic, and The End of the Edwardian Era, among others. His recently published book, The Palace, From the Tudors to the Windsors, 500 Years of History at Hampton Court, does exactly what the title suggests and takes readers over 500 years to discover the endlessly fascinating stories of the people and events that shaped not only Hampton Court, but the country. So joining us live from London, please welcome Gareth Russell.
Andrea,
hi, Gareth.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you for coming.
My pleasure.
Yeah, thanks. Now, we haven't met in person yet, but we have but we have had a number of exchanges, and we were part of the recent Stuart Online History Festival for British History Tours, and that was really fun. And but what really impressed me was your erudition and the rapidity with which you remember dates, historical figures, and very complex situations. And you put forth your observations in such a clear and thoroughly entertaining manner. It just blew me away. I don't think I've ever encountered that before. And I thought it was fantastic. So there, I just want to say that.
Stop. It's so kind. Thank you very much. Thank you. Appreciate it.
I was wondering, have you always gravitated towards history, or was there a point in your life when you realized you wanted to be a historian?
Yes, to the first question, yes, I've always gravitated towards history. I loved Sunday school, and if it was the Old Testament, I preferred the stories even more. And yeah, I mean, I grew up on stories of the Titanic, really, in Belfast.
Oh.
My great grandparents had seen it, which is kind of eventually what led to the Ship of Dreams, the book you kindly mentioned. Um, in terms of when I mean, it was just always something I was obsessed with. That Anne of the Thousand Days did a number on me. I became sort of
Oh.
obsessed with them afterwards. Um, and so I loved it really throughout my childhood. I did history for A level, and then I did it. It was my undergraduate and my postgraduate. So I think I kind of knew then that it was going to be part of my life. It was also a process of elimination, Andrea. I wasn't really very good at other things. So everyday life was not for me. So I sort of had to make a different career path. But yeah, it was, and also, I mean, it's like anyone who's a brilliant, not that I'm a brilliant writer, but anyone who's a brilliant baker has gotten good. But but you know, I tried baking a couple of years ago for a family Christmas, and will never be asked to do it again. And it's sort of
Oh,
that.
no.
It was there's no polar test that can cover just how bad the cake. It was a very ambitious cake, but it was it went badly wrong.
Well well, if you didn't burn the house down, I think
Yeah,
it's not that bad.
I mean, I think only for the fact that no one ate it. I didn't have to hospitalize
Oh.
or bury a relative.
Oh,
You
dear.
but it's sort of the same thing. Like when you don't remember with writing all the things you got wrong and how long it took to kind of get into your groove. So I think I realized I wanted to be a historian probably around the time of my master's when I was 24, 25. But it was a long process, so it's a lot of ruined cakes, to extend the metaphor slightly.
Oh, well. Well, who knows? You might, become the historian baker as well. No, no, absolutely not. Okay.
My mother tried her valiant maternal best. And, "Oh, sweetheart, I'm sure it's lovely." She had half a forkful and said, "Do you know what? We will have ice cream." So
Okay, then.
even a mother's love could not make that cake acceptable. I'll
Right.
show you the video. It's proof. You actually see the descent. I start off so confidently, and then this
Oh.
Whitehall after the fire is probably the closest that I can, like, just accept no
Oh,
bounce.
dear.
It's awful, really awful.
Oh, gosh. Oh, well, um, your book, The Palace, is extraordinary, and I can't recommend it more. Um, uh, I can completely see why you would have been inspired to write about Court. It really is an amazing place,
Mm.
even to this day. I know that most people tend to associate it with the Tudors, but the Stuarts had a lot to do with it too. Can you tell us about the first Stuarts,
Mm.
King James and his wife Anna of Denmark, and their time at the palace, please?
Yes, they really were huge fans of it. I think argue it might have been Anna of Denmark's favorite home.
Mhm.
Sort of 10,000 acres, and James the First was like almost an obsessive hunter. I mean, it really
Mm.
was a huge part of his. Until I did the research, I hadn't realized how he'd spent most of his reign technically hunting, and so the Hampton Court chase was convenient for that. It had the smaller hunting lodges dotted throughout it. And also, I think what was really useful was this is sort of to go back to when they were King and Queen of Scots. Their
Mhm.
marriage had been really under a lot of strain because Anna was very upset at Scottish royal protocol, which brought up the heir to the throne away from his parents in the countryside,
Mm.
which was not
Yes.
put, I mean, arguably more strain on their marriage than James's alleged love affairs with various gentlemen of the court. It really
Mm.
distressed. And so when they came to Hampton Court, there was a subsidiary palace within the grounds, Oatlands, where Henry VIII had married Catherine Howard 60 years earlier, just about. And they could put Prince Henry and Princess Elizabeth there. And so
Mhm.
actually, it was close to Hampton Court, it was close to the Queen, it kept them safe in the countryside, but it resolved this huge problem that had existed within the marriage. So there was a lot of utility to it. But James and Anna also, I think, really, felt the way you and I have said about Hampton Court, that it's a splendid, magnificent building. And it
Mhm.
reminded Anna, I think, of places like Roskilde and places like the family's palace at Helsingor, where she'd had spent quite a bit of time as a child, the Kronborg, which is where they had um, spent what we might call their honeymoon. But
Mhm.
but it reminded her of the grandeur of the Danish palaces she'd grown up in, and she
I
really,
see.
yeah, I think she takes to it like a duck to water. I mean, it's something she's used to. So she stages elaborate masks there for their first Christmas, which is one of the things I talk about in the book. And she very much she dazzles there, and all the ambassadors are very impressed by Anna. And I mean, you certainly will have encountered this. I'm sure many of your listeners and viewers will have that.
Mhm.
Um, we stereotype the Tudor queens a lot, and it's taken a lot of historians a lot of time to chip away at those stereotypes. But there
Mhm.
still hasn't been an attempt to chip away at them really with the Stuarts. The Stuart royal women still tend to have them, and this idea
Yes.
of Anna as a sort of, I mean, I think it was Maurice Ashley.
Uh,
Yeah, that's the
well,
prevailing.
yeah, yeah. I
Yeah,
mean, she doesn't get a fully fleshed character. You don't have her characterization really. You get to
no,
know her personality. It's, very, two-dimensional, if that.
well, it is, and she
Um
had so much personality. It's one of the things I try to get
Mhm.
across in the chapter about her in the book, that she was really remarkable, and a lot of people at the time were so much more impressed by her than they were by James. Part of that is because James really just doesn't feel inclined to play the etiquette game, which rubs a lot of people up the wrong way, although that probably makes him more appealing to us. Anna she really utilizes Hampton Court as a stage for monarchy. And of course,
Mhm.
ultimately, she dies there in 1619, and that's one of the chapters that I write about. And I found the Anna, and to a lesser extent the James, that I knew, actually, no, not to a lesser extent, the two of them, were this absolutely extraordinary couple, were dynasts in their hearts, and they worked together to make this new dynasty work in England, Ireland, and Wales. And James commissions the King James Bible at Hampton Court. Anna stages some of the first great masques there. They have their
Yeah.
first Christmas there. It is a great amphitheater of dynasty under the two of them. So, along with discovering their personalities, ascertaining their political and cultural ambitions there were fascinating.
Thank you. That's really brilliant, and I look forward to, more, research and publication about the Stuart
Mhm.
consorts. I mean, it is. I think it's happening now. I mean,
It
more
is.
is
It
coming
is.
out. Think this year and
Well, we have, I mean, I
next
know
year.
it's not an official concert, but we have your book coming out, which, I've done the forward for. And I think we
Yeah.
do have, we've had Anna Delisle and Henrietta Maria.
Mhm.
And I think we
Yes.
are having more and more, and Linda Porter on Charles I's children.
Yes.
We have more. I'm currently working, I'm due to finish next week, a private life of James, really told from the perspective of Anna and six of the men he was in love with over the course of his life. And they are really, this usually at this stage of the book, I'm sick of it, and you're through the weeds and you're tired.
Yes.
And
Yes.
I think I'll leave the Jacobean court with a deal of reluctance. It's been the most fascinating book to work on, and the two of them, James and Anna, and all, because really, obviously with the palace, Andrea, I had to stick with them
Mhm.
there at Hampton Court.
Mhm.
This is their
Mhm.
life, their marriage, and it is absolutely thrilling. And I hope this is the start. This is my gut. I'll hedge my bets here, but I think the Stuarts are the next big thing. That's my instinct. I think they
Yes.
are so rich and fascinating. The Tudors
Mhm.
are brilliant. They're extraordinary, but there's a lot on them.
Yes.
And eventually, I think I think if we have hopefully good stories being told, people will want to read them.
Yeah, I agree. And, that goes with other periods, of course. There's so much out there that hasn't been done yet, and I mean, I love the Tudors. They were my, you know, intro to
Love,
history, if you
yeah.
will, like many of us. Um, but it's funny. I just got into it because of things like Anne of a Thousand Days. That's a really big one. and um, and then I was given some history books, and it was about Henry VIII and everything, and that was great. But I think once I got into the Shakespeare when I was
Oh,
in
was that your bridge? That's interesting. That's really
that it definitely was Shakespeare for me. Um, and I kept being told, "Oh, he's definitely a Tudor. He's a Tudor period person, and that's it."
I don't
But
know.
then no,
Yeah, I agree. It's
1616. I
not
mean, there are 16 years
right.
of being in the 17th century. There's that. And I just found
Uh,
him so fascinating. And then that sort of goes into Jacobean theatre and all these other ones. And then I got into Ben Jonson, and
mm,
it's just there's just so much. There's a wealth of literature, and that did it for me.
that's so interesting. That was your bridge. I love that.
Mhm.
It literally is a perfect bridge between Elizabethan and Jacobean.
Mm,
Shakespeare's the
indeed.
perfect. And you know, funny. I mean, mine really strangely was an actress who is more famous for playing Anne Boleyn, which is Dorothy Chitton. And she
Oh,
plays Henrietta Maria in the Richard Harris Cromwell. And I
yes,
remember
I remember that.
it's such a bloated movie, but and I actually remember thinking that Charles the First and Henrietta Maria stuff was so much more interesting. And this is when I was a child, so I, for a time, was sort of equally interested in the Tudors and Stuarts. Then fell more into the Tudor camp
Mhm.
for the Stuarts, and I also just think they cast a shadow that really to understand Britain today is you have to understand it's the Stuarts. I think they are. I think they are the field in which a lot of the harvest was sown of what would come
Yeah,
later.
yeah, definitely. Um, it did become quite an important place during their son Charles I's reign. I mean, particularly during the civil wars, of course. Charles I was at Hampton Court for some time. Could you tell us more about that phase for those who aren't acquainted with that part of history, please?
Of Charles's monarchy there. You know, he spent a lot of time there with Henrietta Maria, his French wife, in the 1620s and 1630s. But really,
Mhm.
the chapter I have in the book looks at two visits that he had in the 1640s. One in 1642 and one in 1647. 1647 and he 1647 probably, so the second civil war starts in 48. But he flees with his wife and three of their children on the eve of the Civil War, of these riots in London that we now know will be sort of the first pebble over the edge of the avalanche. At least for the civil wars in England, they were probably already effectively had started in Ireland and
Mm.
Scotland. They flee, and there's riots against the king's mishandling of Parliament. There's a split within the court where even the Queen's favourite lady in waiting seems to have betrayed some of their plans uh,
Mm.
to Parliament, and yet the Guard remain very loyal. And they arrive, and it's for this fantastic descriptions that I find in the sources of real pathetic fallacy if you're a royalist, you know, kind of the river breaking its banks because the rain is so heavy. And they arrive. And so in early modern palaces, a lot of the furniture is dismantled and moved uh,
Mm.
palace to palace. And so they arrive with it's such short notice that there isn't a bed for them in the royal apartments. They find eventually one bed in an empty lady in waiting's bedroom. And you have this quite moving image of the king, the queen, and the three children huddling together in this bed for warmth.
Mm.
And then later they have to flee further onwards to Oxford, which becomes the royalist capital
Yeah.
throughout the Civil War years. He loses that Civil War, and 5 years later, he is back under a not very onerous sentence as prisoner at Hampton Court. And when he arrives, there really is this moment where they believe they can find a resolution for potentially a constitutional monarchy. I certainly was under the best way I can describe how my views changed during the research was I went in very sympathetic to Charles I. I emerged
Mhm.
slightly less sympathetic to him, if I'm totally honest.
Mm. Right.
but I also emerged unsympathetic to nearly everyone involved. It wasn't like the royalists fell and the parliamentarians rose.
Yeah.
I do think that, and I sort of put this out as a possible theory. I do think that there were parliamentarians, possibly Oliver Cromwell being one of them, who deliberately let the king escape and kind of pressured him into doing so, because they knew if he fled midway through negotiations at Hampton Court, they would have to finally abolish the monarchy. And interestingly, it was one of Cromwell's friends who said the king has fallen into Cromwell's mousetrap, which I thought was a very interesting, revealing turn of phrase. But yeah, the chapter I look at, Andrea, is Charles in captivity and what's happening. And you have, interestingly, visits from the Marquis of Ormond. And he actually tips the king off and says, look, Ireland is not going to go along with this parliamentarian settlement. We have Irish Protestants will not abandon loyalty to the monarchy, and Irish Catholics want nothing to do with a Puritan-dominated regime. So, for the first time in a very long time, Ireland is united on this, and we're not going to give way to a Puritan system. So Charles, I think, it knows that actually he's a huge amount of support beyond the walls of Hampton Court. But he does flee, and that escape from Hampton Court, that nighttime escape I describe in the book, is used as justification by Republicans or crypto-Republicans in Parliament to say there can be no deal with the monarchy. He'll run away again. The final peace treaty to this has to be written in his blood, I think, is kind of the conclusion that the monarchy's critics reach. And so that chapter, The Wharf, chapter 14, in the palace, really about departures, and it's a political chapter. It's about these negotiations and things falling apart. So yeah, it is. Hampton Court's the pivot on which turns the monarchy's survival in the 1640s.
Wow, it's quite a fraught and tempestuous time, and one, sadly, that many do not know much about. And I've talked about this with other guests, that it's something that doesn't really crop up in schools much, about all these different important events, and many people don't know about the civil wars at all, which is quite shocking, I think. And I just hope that perhaps with TV shows and films that can change. People might want to seek out more information and learn more about the history of the country.
I hope so.
Yeah. So during the restoration of the Stuart monarchy in 1660, Hampton Court once again became an important palace. It wasn't as important, arguably, as Whitehall Palace, perhaps because that was more of a government center and whatnot. But certainly some very important things happened there. Could you please give us an idea of Charles II's impact on Hampton Court? Like what kind of changes occurred under his reign, perhaps?
Court is broadly speaking negative, actually. He particularly in the final 16 years of his time as king, he spends, I think, less than a week there. He last spends an extended chunk of time there in 1669 when he and his Portuguese wife, Queen Catherine, who I think, along with her Italian sister-in-law, Mary Beatrice, is one of the consorts who deserves a good, full-length, chunky biography.
Yes.
It's sort of extraordinary, actually, that Mary Beatrice of Modena hasn't had one in a long time. But anyway, I digress into James II. But Charles and Queen Catherine of Braganza go to Hampton Court for 2 weeks to mourn the Queen Mother when she dies in France of an accidental opium overdose. They've been trying to sort of microdose her with opium to help her with chronic insomnia, and they get the dose wrong and she never wakes up. And after that, he spends very little time there, and he does, as you'll know, of course, Barbara Castlemaine essentially becomes the chatelaine there. And Barbara's not, I don't think you could say she's a conscientious conscientiousness of building. um, and she really doesn't, she doesn't, I think, feel the need to pump a huge amount of money into Hampton Court, and Charles certainly doesn't pick
Yeah.
up. In fairness to Barbara, in her defense, a sentence I don't usually say, but Barbara sometimes gets the blame for things that weren't her fault. And in this, she can't be expected to fund the upkeep of Hampton Court Palace. That is an unfair expectation.
Mm-hmm.
And as their relationship, their love affair falls apart, Charles doesn't really want to go to Hampton Court to spend time with her. So you're really left with the biggest impact on Hampton Court being in his first 9 years as king, and arguably only 7 of those. You do see him gut it off any of the Puritan accoutrement that it's acquired, during the Republic. Including the outdoor preaching auditorium. The chapel is reconsecrated and redecorated as an Anglican place of worship. We do know that there's a great deal of maintenance done in the Queen's apartments in preparation for Catherine of Braganza's arrival there in 1662. And generally speaking, in the 1660s, the palace is maintained and restored, but you don't see any kind of substantial renovations or changes to it. In many ways, that had been his parents. They were the ones who installed the new tennis court and the plumbing, and Cromwell had kept that. And what Charles II does, James II continues, and by the time Mary II becomes queen in 1689 and comes to see it for the first time since her childhood, she describes it as a place that has been very much neglected. So I think that is kind of what I took away. I loved writing chapter 16. Focuses on Barbara, but for the palace, it was a less, for me and the reader, it's a great time. For the palace's architecture and maintenance, it's a less happy time.
Right. I wonder if you'll allow me to read a little excerpt from my book, Ravenous. It's from chapter 7, which is about the Portuguese bride, and it's about Hampton Court. Labourers toiled in the bleakness of the winter of 1661-62, digging the hard, frozen ground in the parkland of Hampton Court Palace. They were beginning the arduous work of creating what would come to be known as the Long Water, a French-style canal which remains in existence to this day, and which would lie directly in front of the new Queen's bedchamber. Costing a little over £1,400, the canal was being built to both impress and honour Catherine of Braganza. Huge improvements to the Tudor-era palace of Hampton Court had already been carried out since marriage negotiations with Portugal had been concluded the previous June, but this water feature, lined with 758 lime trees, would be truly incredible. So they did some things there for, as we mentioned, for
the Long Water,
Catherine of Braganza.
Yes, exactly. Yeah,
it's so beautiful.
Really is, and it does look very it's so reminiscent. You can see it being kind of the sister canal to Versailles. It's very similar in design, and it's really, after, it's just such a shame that the last serious amount of money that Charles II spends in Hampton Court is for Catherine of Braganza's arrival, and she's so miserable there when she arrives.
Yeah.
Long Water is very pretty, but it would be a lot prettier if she didn't have to wake up to Barbara Castleman's pregnant face attending her.
I know. That's terrible.
And it's interesting, one thing that from that whole argument, for listeners, that Charles sort of had, and it's so hypocritical because he really sharply criticized his cousin Louis XIV for making his wife Marie Therese of Spain be in the same orbit as I think it was Athanase de Montespan, but it might have been Louise de la Vallière, but Louis XIV's mistress. And all of a sudden, when it's his wife, Charles thinks it's completely fine, and he insists that Barbara serves Queen Catherine. He is mortified by this. But one of the things I picked up on were these descriptions from Lord Clarendon, Charles' sister, where he talks about hearing Charles and Catherine screaming at each other. But really interestingly, what he then goes on to say is, thank goodness it's at Hampton Court, not in the town, which gives you an idea that Hampton Court really is seen, to your earlier point, as separate from, very different to Whitehall, and that there's more a sense of privacy there than there is in or Whitehall.
Yeah. Whitehall Palace was a sort of sprawling series of buildings that were part of a palace that was created for Henry VIII, or was
Yeah,
it
Wolsey. It was Wolsey, and he took it. And
Wolsey?
yeah,
Yes, yeah, no.
but really, I would probably go with your earlier sentence. I think it is an ecclesiastical building. Is
Mm,
Wolsey really the palace? That kind of sprawling complex to me is
yeah,
the Henry VIII thing.
okay. And so, yeah, quite a few of these Stuart courtiers and big names, they did have apartments in Whitehall Palace,
Mhm.
which burned down in 1698. For those who don't know, and the only thing that's remaining, that's left of it, is the banqueting house, which is very, very close. It's like opposite Downing Street, just a bit
Mhm.
down the road. For those who may have visited London and have gone to Downing Street, that sort of thing. And it's amazing how when I was researching things, it's amazing how so many people had interactions. One courtier was related to this person, and it's all interconnected. And I found that quite fascinating. There was Samuel Pepys, of course. He was a very famous 17th century diarist, and he he often wrote about things. And one that I mentioned in this book is where he was in a traffic jam on King Street. And King Street is where Barbara had a house with her husband, Roger. And uh, there was this massive traffic jam because the Earl of Chesterfield had a servant who got into an argument with a drayman or something, and someone got an injury. And it's just everyone's connected because, of course, Chesterfield was once connected to Barbara, so it's
Yeah,
all connected.
of course. It's a very it's never even really 6 degrees of separation at the Stuart court. It's usually about one or two.
Yes, indeed. Yeah. So yes, Charles II. He was very well known for his love life,
Yes.
and we've already covered that he had a mistress who was called Barbara Palmer, but she was better known as Barbara Villiers, which was her maiden name. Now, Gareth very kindly read an early draft, very early draft, may I add, of my book, Ravenous, and he honored me by writing the foreword for it. Now, Barbara made a big deal about having her lying in at Hampton Court Palace. And a lying in was when a woman was heavily pregnant and she was going to be in a series of apartments or her house and not really move from that area. So, as she prepared for the arrival of her baby. Now, the gossip up the time was that Barbara was going to do that. She was going to have her lying in at Hampton Court Palace, right as the new queen was coming to Hampton Court Palace on her honeymoon.
Yep.
So that was a really big rumor at the time. Everyone was talking about it. Now, Pepys did mention this, of course, and however, she ended up giving birth to her son at her house in King Street, and that was very close to Whitehall Palace. She was something else, wasn't she? She knew how to get
Yeah.
people talking.
It's hard sometimes because I think a lot of historians go in with the intention of like rehabilitating someone rather than just rediscovering them, which is a
Mm,
different thing. And sometimes with Barbara, with many people, you think there's just no way to contextualize this as something pleasant.
mm,
To make a point of I'm going to give birth to this
yeah,
man's illegitimate son in the same building where he's welcoming his new wife for his honeymoon. There is
yeah,
no amount of context that renders that a kind or understandable act.
yeah.
Um,
I don't know
it
anyone who'd
also,
think that's a good idea.
no, not in
No,
1662, not in 2024. It's just a
no,
no. Yeah, yeah.
indeed.
She was something else.
Oh, yeah. Um, and oh, I was gonna say something. I've lost my train of thought. But yeah, but the thing about Barbara, I remember now. I went into it wanting to just know if she was actually
Mm,
as people had said. And I found that to a certain extent, people were largely right.
Yeah.
However, I think that she has been maligned largely about Nonsuch Palace. And I,
It was, what could she do, Andrea? I mean, really,
yeah,
this idea that she just tore down a perfectly good Tudor palace. It was,
she didn't.
yeah,
It was totally dilapidated.
yeah,
And she did. There are some signs that she wanted to try to restore it a bit. She had andirons made, and they were purchased by her.
yeah,
And of course, you don't buy that. Those are irons that go
yeah.
into the hearth. Um, for those who don't know, um, and she wouldn't have purchased those if she wasn't thinking about perhaps using that. But it was proved
Far gone.
it was just really bad, and it
Yeah,
was already bad by the time that the restoration came. Henrietta Maria was the owner, and she
yeah.
wasn't going to do anything about it.
No,
It's
and
foregone.
to Barbara's defense, yeah, I agree with that with Nonsuch actually. And to Barbara's
Mm.
defense, just one of the things that I was so interested to discover when I worked in Young and Damned and Fair is that Barbara, a lot of Henry VIII's projects that he embarked upon himself were slipshod, and they were style over substance. So if you look at the parts of Hampton Court that weathered the coming centuries, they were built by Wolsey or somebody else. So
Mm.
the Tudor wing that he had built in the 1530s, gutted and redid in the 1540s, that had to be torn down in the 1680s, which interestingly is ballpark when Nonsuch, which he also had built in a hurry, is beyond the point of saving. So I don't think it's coincidence. And Oatlands is a lot of them that he touched
Hmm.
the same. Um,
Right.
a lot of his bits of Whitehall need to be redone under the Stuarts, excuse me. So yeah, I don't think she can be blamed for this. Nonsuch,
Yeah.
like anything he will have done, will have lasted a century, and that's it.
Mm. Yeah, I think
Yeah,
you're absolutely right. I think that there's a lot in that. Yeah, definitely.
yeah,
Um, as we said earlier, perhaps most people think of Hampton Court Palace as a Tudor building. And whilst I like the Tudor period and the style and everything, I really love the Baroque side. And there is a small apple orchard and this beautiful Dutch style garden, this sort of sunken garden, similar to the one that is at Kensington Palace that I used to take people around during my garden history tours many years ago. Um, and I really loved that, and I've spent many hours in that area, particularly when we lived in Balham in London, and it was just a pretty short drive to get to Hampton Court. That place has been my favorite part of the palace. Could you let us know what your favorite part of Hampton Court is?
well, I feel as if I'm finally in the safest of safe spaces to say this. So I actually do prefer the Baroque wing to the Tudor wing.
Oh,
And when I say that, I've
mhm,
said that actually to people who work there, and there's a gasp as if they can't,
mhm.
like you can't. Um,
Yeah, I've
uh,
had that too.
well, I love the Baroque wing. I love the Queen's drawing room. I really love the
Oh,
Queen's
yes,
drawing room. It's
that's
just
lovely.
it's that fantastic um manic magnificence that the Baroque has. It's just everywhere
Mhm,
in that room. And I have to say, I really do like Queen Caroline's apartments from the Georgian period, the private apartments.
mhm, right.
And William III's private dining room, that kind of the one on the
Oh,
ground.
yeah.
ah, it's
That's
bliss.
so cozy.
It
Yeah.
is because I know it's covered in gold and huge, but it's still like palace standards. It's intimate.
It's lovely. Yes.
I do. I think I love the Baroque wing. I really, really do, and I love taking people to it. Um, I have a soft spot in the Tudor wing for the pages room, that little room they've restored to show how the page boys lived. That I
Right.
really enjoy as well. But no, I think it's probably the Queen's drawing room, King William's dining room, yeah, and maybe some of Queen Caroline's private sitting rooms, or Queen Caroline's where her dressing table is a
Right.
great spot. But yeah, front center is the Queen's drawing room.
Lovely.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for that. Um, you know, I have a bit of a an embarrassing anecdote, something that happened to us many years ago when we were, my husband and I were visiting, and there's this members room for people who are members of historic royal palaces. And we were members for many years until we moved up to Derbyshire. And we got chatting over coffees with this other couple, and they were really, really interesting. And we lost track of the time. And suddenly I looked out and it was dark outside. And I said, I think they might have closed. And we went, so we went outside and everything was locked.
No.
Yeah, the front gates were locked. Everything was locked. And so we all looked at each other and said, we're trapped in Hampton Court Palace at night.
It's kind of the dream, but yeah.
And the funny thing is it took on a sort of eerie feel. And I'm not really into the ghost stuff and everything, but it was very different and almost a little scary, slightly. Anyway, we were going around. We ended up going around the Fountain Court, trying to find anybody, any exit at all. And and then finally we saw a light. We're like, let's go over there. And it was the vicar. Yeah, I think it was the vicar who was working late. And and he kindly let us out through a side door. It was amazing.
Oh, so you'd have to go and wake up on some of the Grace and Favour residents otherwise. Yeah.
Yeah, that might have been the next thing that we would have had to try. But
yeah, of course.
But yeah, I didn't expect that to happen. But I think they check that in the members' room now. So yeah.
Them.
But it was incredible because it is a memorable experience, but quite embarrassing too. I hope they don't like kick me out forever for that. Yeah. So I was wondering, do you have any preference for music? I mean, do you like 17th century music, and do you listen to any music when you write?
Yeah, it can't have any lyrics though. When I write.
Yep.
They distract me. I do. I love Jean-Baptiste Lully, and I love a bit of Purcell from the quite a few of which, not all of them, have lyrics. But yeah, no, I do. I think some. I mean, I think the 17th century music is so interesting. Oh, who was it? Yeah, Purcell did Mary II's funeral, which I just think is absolutely stunning.
It is stunning. Yes.
And I think sometimes the 17th century, even Purcell had a real moment during the Victorian period. They loved him, and he was very widely performed. And I think into the 20th century, he was until sort of the tail end. He kind of fell out of fashion. All things are cyclical, though. But I think sometimes 17th century music doesn't quite get the credit it deserves. Or at least, the attention. Sorry, the attention is probably a better way to describe it. But yeah, Lully and Purcell are my.
Lovely, very nice. And of course, we have Purcell's Abdelazar theme for our opening credits. Yeah, I'm a big fan of that as well.
It's perfect music for your opening, by the way. Just so that's
oh, thank you. I find I listen to Tous les matins du monde, that the soundtrack for that. I'm a big fan of Jordi Savall. I don't know if you.
Yeah. I think that was one of my playlists for that, because I do. Yes, it was. Sorry, excuse me. It was a playlist I do for each book. To your question about writing, but the Palace was the most eclectic of them all, because I was trying to get things from the 16th up to the mid 20th century.
Oh, is that available to people? Can people look at that, or is that?
I should probably Spotify it. That's my do that.
Because I've got a playlist for Ravenous. Well, two.
Yeah,
for Ravenous. And I would love to listen to that.
Yeah, sure, absolutely. A lot of Scottish music for James the First one, and then a lot of this gallop through the centuries musically for the Palace. Yeah, I'll Spotify that.
Yes, please. Yeah, that's great. Okay, fantasy dinner party in the Stuart period. Who would you invite, and what would you serve?
This is difficult because on the one hand there's the historical curiosity, but there's also, you have to balance your table. Because on my first instinct would be Henrietta Maria, but I have a feeling feeling if you have Henrietta Maria, you can't have anyone else who might threaten her luster and shine. She has to be at the table, and I think I'd have to choose between her and Anna of Denmark. And just what I'm looking on the minute, I'll go with Anna. I don't think either of them were there to share attention, put it that way.
Okay.
And so I think, although in a perfect world, Anna of Denmark and Henrietta Maria, I quite like. Not that I. George Villiers, the first Duke of Buckingham, just to see what all the fuss is about.
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah.
I'd like to see what the fuss is all about too.
Very easy on the eye, apparently. Everyone says he's the most beautiful man they've ever seen, but I struggle to find. And Robert Carr, Lord Somerset as well. I struggle to find what is it that James was so in love with. Because there's not, because Robert Carr, I mean, Lord Somerset and George Buckingham, James is with them for years. It's a lot longer than just than their looks. It has to be, but I can't find anything else. And so maybe it's that ineluctable quality of charisma or personality.
Yes.
So and I mean, I think Mary Beatrice of Modena would be a great choice because I think she was lovely. And Nell Gwyn.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I just think you would have I think you have a great time with her. For food, and then I also think maybe Charles II would be great fun as well. I think he'd be a great dinner party guest. Then he might, I don't know. I don't think he would be someone I'd be racing to put at the table. There was an Irish aristocrat, Lord Tyrone, Hugh O'Neill, who I think I find quite interesting and had that charisma as well that doesn't quite come across on the paper. So maybe Lord Tyrone, Anne of Denmark, Henrietta Maria. I need George Villiers. Me as a third man. I need one more woman to even the table. So let's say Nell Gwyn. And
Perfect.
I think food. You want something there that's vaguely 17th century, so I think I'd go or
you can give them what you like to have.
Yeah, I mean, my tastes are not divorced from the 17th century. I think I love pigeon for starter, which horrifies some people.
Oh, you've had that. Where did you have that? I want to have that.
You've got to have. It's delicious. It's dark. Right. So there's I had it in Oxford, and I had it. There's some places in Belfast do it. Just aim for kind of like gastro pubs or somewhere, or sort of like older style restaurants around like autumn. I would have a little pigeon on a bed of roast potatoes with lardons in them, and then I think I would do like venison, dauphinoise for Henrietta Maria because I don't like dauphinoise with potatoes, but everyone else does. Bread, cabbage, and then for pudding. Probably, I'd be interested to see it, though I wouldn't touch it. One of those hideous confections, the sugar confections. James and Anne of Denmark had ones made for them by Lady Grace Mildmay when they were coming south in 1603. So I would have that, and for anyone like me who just could not bear the sight of all that, maybe like something like a little vanilla, something vanilla for those of us who are not going to eat an actual block of sugar.
Well, you could also give maybe a Viennetta. That looks quite nice.
Who wouldn't? Yeah, Viennetta, you can't go wrong with it.
It's quite pretty.
Yeah, they'd love it. Like
ice cream too. Yeah,
and all those other.
Awesome.
That's exactly it.
Well, I would love to invite myself over to that
absolutely
Stuart party as well.
I'm quite upset that I won't be able to make that happen.
Oh, it's great. Well, thank you so much, Gareth. It's been so much fun to talk with you.
It's my
pleasure. Well, you can, our lovely people in the audience, you can buy a copy of Gareth's book, The Palace, from any good bookseller. Gareth also has his own podcast, Single Malt History. And you definitely should check that out. I like it. I'm subscribed to that. Yeah.
I really appreciate that.
Oh, yes. Yes, I'm subscribed. Yeah.
Thank you. This has been lovely. I'm so glad to talk only about Stuarts. I'm just so pleased. So pleased.
Anytime. I'm here to talk about the Stuarts. Yes.
Brilliant. That's so much fun.
Thanks. And I would like to thank Gareth, and to Gavin, my producer, and to our audience. Next month, our scheduled guest is historical novelist Nicola Cornick. Until next time, don't forget to keep it Stuart. Goodbye.